Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. How are you enjoying WWL? Oh, turn it up. Turn it up. Listen, this is the last panel, and I'm not going to say that we saved the best for last, but you do the math. This is going to be great. I'm biased, of course, not just moderating it, but I spent my career in HR before joining Upwork, and I love talking about what's happening in the world of talent. And especially in this world of freelancers, which a lot of you understand the value, but not everybody does. And you can see it on those videos you just watched. You just watched a couple videos featuring a couple of our amazing freelancers. One of them is here with us today, Abigail Baker. So please, if you see her, take the time to talk to her directly, learn more about her experience live. I'm confident that you'll really enjoy that. But now I'm going to turn into some of our commentary for today, and starting with Gartner Research, which says 70% of CEOs expect their CHROs to be key players in enterprise strategy. So what does that mean? That means 30% still have to figure it out. I don't know what they're thinking yet. But what that represents is HR's role in defining the strategy, not just for talent, but for the organization, is increasing rapidly, which makes sense when we think of the current dynamic that we're in. But HR, just like individuals, doesn't do this alone. We've got to partner across the entire business with other functions, including procurement, but also, of course, with finance and legal and engineering and marketing, all the folks you've already heard with today. So what we're going to do today is pull back some of that curtain and talk about how that happens. Where are there challenges? Where are there opportunities? And you're going to hear about it from really outstanding executives, starting with our own Zoe Hart, who's our Chief People Officer at Upwork. Zoe, how long have you been at Upwork now?
Almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years is our HR leader, so very grateful for that. David Harris, Senior Vice President of HR at PepsiCo. And David, you've been at PepsiCo for how long?
18 years.
18 years. Based where?
I'm based in Dallas.
Based in Dallas. Awesome. And Sarah Harse, breaking the trend of HR folks, representing procurement, global category leader for HR services and professional education at Johnson & Johnson. So welcome, Sarah, and how long have you been at J&J?
About 8 years and 1 year in this role, but I think it counts as more with 1 year supporting HR in this very unique time.
So really excited to have some conversation with all of you about what is happening in the world of talent sourcing. And I think the first question that makes sense to ask is, whose job is it? We got HR, we got procurement, we're hearing from other functions, and this role of sourcing and identifying talent can come from anywhere in the organization. But who's ultimately responsible? Zoe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is responsible for bringing in exceptional talent to drive the business initiatives that are the priorities for the organization. HR has a powerful role in that, but so do the people managers, so does procurement. We all have to do it together to be successful.
So I'll jump to you then, Sarah. It's everybody's job, of course. What role does procurement play in that identifying new ways of finding talent, especially in this environment?
Yeah, I think when we go back to the theme of kind of the old ways of work and the new ways of work that we've been talking about today, I think in the past you saw procurement play a role in that kind of upfront, we're going to go out, we're going to source, we're going to find the channel, we'll put it in place, and then, it operates as is. But I think what we're finding is that's not enough anymore. Just having the channel available is not enough to really solve for the great challenges that are ahead of all of our people leaders. And so the more we can do to partner with our HR counterparts, our finance counterparts, our legal counterparts to connect those dots and really think about each of us having a unique role to play, but really with that hiring manager at the center and helping them kind of navigate all of these different channels we have available is really critical.
So ownership, or who drives that bus kind of aside, what does cross-functional collaboration look like in identifying this talent source? David, what's it like for you at PepsiCo?
Yeah, I think, when we do we think of different functions. We've got a partnership with finance, is always plays a role in a big company. We work with procurement to make sure we have all the contracts and partnerships in place. And then our internal TA plays a really key role in that, in terms of making sure that we have the people that we need available.
Yeah, and there's no doubt communication plays a big role across all these functions, right? Communicating what you're working on, what your strategies are, and developing that strategy. How do you communicate across those functional lines when you potentially have different metrics, different objectives? How do you kind of blend those together? Start with you again, Zoe.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may have different metrics in each individual team. TA may be working to one, and finance and procurement could be working to another. But if you step back, and I think this is the role of the leader, step back and look at the overall objectives you're working towards for the business mission, then you're all working together. And then it's a lot easier to see how you can, merge your OKRs together, merge your plans together, and really make sure you're making good compromises, and to his point, communicate and really have a conversation about that so that people understand the give and take everybody's working with, and you'll be able to find alignment. I think it's pretty rare you can't come to some level of agreement.
Yeah, that communication, partnering across functions, and getting to the point where you understand where your objectives are aligned, because they are at some point.
Absolutely.
It's moving beyond maybe some of the metrics that just aren't exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
David, what's that like for you at PepsiCo?
Yeah, I think we really try to empower our managers, so we try not to put too many constraints around it, and by empowering that manager, that helps bring the group together, because we're ultimately there, our functions there, other functions that help them succeed in whatever they're trying to deliver. So really try to empower the manager and then give them the support that they need to execute, whether it's hiring or whatever their other goals are.
So with all the best communicating that we can do, we can run into some hiccups, we can run into some problems. Can you tell us about experience you've had in trying to work through in your organization cross-functionally some of the potential problem areas are, and then also where there's some opportunities that we can work towards a better goal?
Sure, I can start on that one. I think, one of the most common pitfalls I see is the last minute rush that these things can become. And when you throw something over the wall to another function and say, I need this in 2 weeks, but you haven't been in the journey together. You don't understand the why. You don't understand all of the work that may have already happened. And it feels like, to that person who just has this sense of urgency that there's not the same alignment on that priority level. I think so much of that can be resolved with better collaboration early on in the ideation phase. We have a number of SMEs across all of our large organizations that can bring a lot to the table. And you talked about this ambition of, HR executives, really being really great general business executives. We get the same message in procurement. You shouldn't see us at the table as the supply chain person or the procurement person. We ultimately are a beneficiary of these strategies too. And I think coming in fairly new to a role supporting HR, I think the greatest learning I've had is we all identify with talent access as a need. We are all people leaders. We all know how challenging it is to fill those seats and to get the work done. So it's really easy to get people on board with that message if you bring them in early and you start to engage with those legal counterparts and those finance counterparts at the start of the journey, so that you can bring down some of those barriers that inevitably come up in some of these unique relationships we want to build to really be successful.
Yeah, in talking to a lot of clients, change management is often the biggest, hardest lift. It's the idea can be great, and you've heard from a lot of great speakers already today about what value this brings, but actually moving the needle and getting it adopted within the rest of the business beyond your own function or responsibility can be the hardest lift. What's that been like for you, David, as a champion trying to help this expand within Pepsi?
Yeah, we're a big company. We have 310,000 employees, and so there's a lot of organizational momentum to the status quo. And the status quo is, hiring full-time employees that work with you for the longer the better. It's kind of a very traditional approach to it. And so helping people understand that there's different ways of doing that, and helping people think through how can you take an FTE, a person, and break that into projects that you can go and do. And so some groups are easy. We've gotten good traction in our insights, our marketing, some of our e-commerce areas, because they're used to thinking in that way. But when you ask a finance person, how can you take a piece of their work, or even my function, it's challenging. And bringing forward those use cases even from other areas can be super helpful. I mean, one of the best things I was talking with Zoe before, she's like, what, two-thirds or a third of your organization, two-thirds is not, full-time employees. Yeah. That's a massive mind shift. If we can get to 10%, that would be amazing. But it shows you that you can do it if you work. But there's a lot of organizational inertia to do things the way that we've always done it, because it's worked really well for us.
Yeah, we'd like you to get to 10% too, so that's great.
We're going for 3/4. Yeah,
yeah,
like Upwork.
Eventually 3/4. Yeah. But even Zoe at Upwork, so
Yeah.
we're remote first,
Yeah.
and three quarters, as David just
Yeah.
mentioned again. What's the change management lift for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's still significant depending on, to David's point, where people are in the ecosystem, where they've come from when they've joined us from other companies, and how they learn how to do it. But there are always these moments of unlock, and you can see it with a new person coming in. The vast majority of people who join us either as a hybrid professional or as a corporate employee are really driven by our mission and to deliver results through that mission. And so you see them understand when they start operationalizing using the incredible people with whom we can partner on the Upwork platform, that their aperture expands so drastically. And it makes sense that every single team at Upwork is a hybrid team, to Hayden's point from this morning, with 3/4 of our population in that capacity. It's tremendous because we're allowed to flex up and flex down and bring in people who are exceptional at the work that they do. And that raises everybody's boat because you're really motivated by seeing people do what they do best. And that makes me think about things differently, right? I'm learning from you. You've got a perspective that I don't have. It's contagious in the very best way possible. And I know contagious is not a word we're into after 2020, but in this case, I think it's really positive.
It's a good way to use it. We need to put some positive spin around that word again.
Yes.
No, that's great. And certainly, even no matter what your experience is with leveraging on-demand talent, we still have a predisposition to engage a certain way. And we see other functions doing it in a different way.
Precisely.
It's such a great opportunity to learn and see how are they leveraging it? How is it impacting their team?
Yeah.
How are they engaging? What about some positive stories of that kind of cross-functional collaboration where you feel like you've been able to have a really nice success that you want to share with this group in pursuing that talent innovation across your business?
Sure, I can start. We have a number of joint ventures that we work on, and the nature of the joint ventures, they don't have access to all the resources of either mother company, if you think of it that way. And so we've had some really great success with a recent joint venture that, they had to do some modeling around their demand, and they didn't have the capacity to do that. We're busy doing our thing, and really bringing in Upwork was a way of building some great, we had programmers in, we had some finance people, we actually brought a couple of people to work together to help deliver something that frankly would have been really hard for this joint venture to do on their own. And certainly would have taken longer. And so, they're all in now. I mean, they don't want to even hire as many people now. They're like, we can manage a lot of our growth by bringing in and out of talent when we need them. That's a complete mind shift of that person who came from PepsiCo, had this incredible experience in a time of need and made a big difference. I think if we can get to managers during those times of need and show them the opportunity, I think that's a big unlock. So that's something we're working on.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, the time of need resonates so much with me, kind of living through this last year. And, great stress, I think, is when we see a proliferation of things thrown at the wall to try and see what we can solve with. And I think we need those refresh points to really challenge ourselves to, think differently when you're kind of in that period of really unique pressure. And then it gives you the opportunity, a year down the road to take a step back and look at how successful were we. And I think when I've seen projects be successful, when we've had kind of been managing through that pressure point, we've taken those pause points throughout the journey to really think about how are we going to measure if this is working. I think so often we can get the train moving so fast and so quickly and be looking to solve that problem, but not be thoughtful around what are the metrics and what does success mean in this area. And it makes it really tough to then take that step back and think about what is the right approach for the longer term. And so I think that it's, going back to the comment I think, Zoe, you made around aligning metrics and kind of what we're going to measure. I think doing those checkpoints along the journey really unlocks the value longer term.
Yeah, and to build on what you're saying, Sarah, I think the other thing that happens in those moments is when there's something urgent, people tend to be far more collaborative and all in to solve the problem. But to your point, if you're putting in those measurements, then you're building it for scale long term. So you're not on the back foot, you're not reactionary, you're really driving the business forward by putting in the parameters and the systems which will allow you to scale rapidly in the future and not have to have it be under duress. Yeah,
and that's a great point of time and need. When I think about that, and I think of what what usually brings folks to the platform is they've got an urgent need for talent, can't find it the traditional way anymore. But it also, and so that's a great way to get started, but it also makes me think of part of what Hayden described earlier this morning, which is, you think back 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, and was there no time of need then? Like, there's kind of always a time of need. When was it easier and we just didn't do it because we didn't plan? It really doesn't get, and as Scott talked about also today, are we in a recession? What's going to happen next? People are anticipating a potential recessionary environment, or we're going to keep doing great and things are going to keep moving in this really tight labor market direction. I think for me, the conclusion is we don't know. Like, there's a lot of uncertainty. It doesn't get easier. It just changes. In that period of uncertainty, how do you guys manage this dynamic, leverage that as an opportunity within your businesses to think strategically and not tactically responsive?
Yeah. I mean, I can jump in a little bit. I mean, I think the other thing to build on what you're saying is it's not binary. It's not recession or not. It's not, is it easy to get talent or not? The best talent is always going to be hard to get and hard to find because they're in such incredible demand. And that's why being able to connect with them on Upwork makes that just totally different as an experience as a leader to be able to access them. And I think that if we are thinking about it in that way, building on the talent access model versus acquisition, where you come and you're going to be here for 15 years, that is not necessarily the value proposition that works arguably on either side in an environment that's so dynamic as it is right now. And so being able to connect in a way that works where both the talent is, retaining agency and the business is driving results, that to me is a way to navigate through this. And hopefully things stabilize in the future and it's all up and to the right. But if they don't, it builds in flexibility to the system so that you're continually able to operate and drive at scale while being mindful of your resources and able to, if you need to wind some part of it down or pause something for a little while or constrain that momentarily, you're able to do that. And I think that's tremendous.
Yeah, I think it's, to build on that, I think it's never been more important, regardless if we have a recession or not. We have, 12, 13% inflation.
Yeah.
Every company, 99% of companies are going to have a cost focus. You can't price enough to keep up with what inflation is doing very easily. And so I think that by nature is going to do a couple things. People are going to be conservative on investments because we don't know what's going to happen. You don't want to hire a bunch of people and then the economy slows down and you have a bunch of extra people, but you also don't want to not get the talent you need because, we're a $80 billion company growing 10% a year. We need a lot of people and resources to grow that way. So I think that this is going to play an even more key role because it allows us flexibility during periods of instability. And I think everyone would agree that we're in a bit of an instability period right now. That hopefully will level out at some point. But right now, I think it's a challenging time, and this is a really flexible solution.
Yeah, I think we're all hopeful for a moment where things feel like they're stable and predictable, but it feels like it's way, way down there because so much changes, and especially the pace that technology drives change, forces change on us in really great ways and really challenging ways. We've got to have that flexibility to be agile and adapt and overcome that. Well, great. So I'm going to hit you with some statistics. Shift just a little bit. In an Upwork survey of business leaders, 8 in 10 said that freelancers are a part of their company's overall workforce strategy. Again, that means there's 2 out of every 10 that just haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to help bring the message to them. How does on-demand talent factor into your company's talent strategy?
I can maybe start. I think we have seen some really fantastic adoption of the Upwork model and this strategy in areas where I think, one of my fellow panelists mentioned that mindset's already built in to how that function operates. So in our marketing and design spaces, we are absolutely seeing, great outcomes. And really the biggest pieces of feedback are the speed it allows us to have. And I think what's unique about this time period we're in now is I think we're at an inflection point where we could see a lot more adoption in a lot of areas that have been more hesitant. When they're sitting there waiting 6 to 12 months to fill a full-time role, what's the risk in, doing some interim assignments and, opening up the aperture and trying one of these channels that's been tried and true and tested somewhere else, and we have the infrastructure available. So I think there's, really incredible opportunity right now to take the foundation that's been built and really grow upon it, even in a relationship like, J&J's and Upwork's that's been, 11 years strong. So I think there continues to be growth opportunities that we're pursuing.
Yeah, and I think for us, we have a pretty broad strategy because we have a lot of frontline employees, we have a lot of management kind of white collar workers, and so we leverage everything. We have like a global business services. We're standing up those in a big way at PepsiCo to build big centers of capability. We continue to leverage, contract temporary labor as part of supporting our manufacturing sites. We have a lot of FTEs, and then I think everybody wants to get at this gig worker, but I don't know that we really know how to do that, and this is one of the best ways. And so I think we're dipping our toe in the water in this, and we're starting to understand it, but I'm confident it's going to play a bigger role as we look forward.
So speaking of looking forward, if we now fast forward 5, even 10 years from now, we'll start to get a little creative. How do you imagine this changing? Where we like to kind of talk about being in a post-pandemic world, and we're hoping that we can find some more stability and predictability. So if you had a forecast, what changes in your organization around talent, the way you find it, the way you engage it, what do you think changes the most?
I think we have a head start given the composition of our workforce. But I will tell you that I think a big part for us will be moving away from I need a person to this is the work I need done, and really leading by managing the work versus the worker, and allowing that to help us understand the best person to engage with and in which capacity to engage with them. Be it, does this really need to be a corporate team member? Can this be somebody who comes in in the staff augmentation model? Can this be somebody who is part of the, expert vetted cloud, and we bring them in and they come in and immediately do the thing that they do best, briefly and swiftly, and it's perfect, and that's great. And so if we can really engage and these are the outcomes, then I think that's going to be transformative for us.
Yeah, shifting much more into outcome-based design up front for so many more of our roles. Dave, what are your thoughts?
It's hard to predict because so many things are changing, and I think one of our speakers said it's the biggest changes we've had probably ever in kind of the workforce. I do think it's going to be some kind of hybrid work model. I don't think we're ever getting people back to the office. And I do think that there's still going to be a significant part of the company that's full-time workers that enjoy the stability, that's an important part of building a culture of an organization. And I don't know that that's going to go away. I look at e-commerce. We have a huge e-commerce business. And when I stood that up, everyone was like, you're going to lose all your talent. And they're only going to stay for 12, maybe 18 months. The average tenure is like 4 years, 4.5 years. So I still think with the right organizational culture and the right growth opportunities, people will stay. I think we'll need to supplement that with increased flexibility. And so is that how much we move on the continuum? I just don't know. But I'm confident that both of those levers are going to still exist.
Yeah, I think as we continue to evolve, technology continues to expand what we can do, how we do it. Flexibility and agility has to be a part of that so that we can respond and grow with our employees, grow with our team. Certainly, though, that's got to affect culture. Like when we talk about becoming more and more hybrid, less time in the office, there's a cultural impact. Well, how do you manage that now and then prepare to continue to manage that cultural dynamic in the future?
So we're one of these companies that's struggling with that right now in terms of getting people in, not getting people in. We have a very strong culture. We're very frontline focused in enabling our frontline to be successful. That's a core part of what we do. And a core part of our culture is that, the people that deliver our product every day, they have to come in. Our manufacturing people, they have to come in. So we're kind of in this, how do you get great talent, you get access to them, but still build this culture that we're there to support them. So we're working through that. We're trying to get people in a couple of days a week. I think a few people have talked about it around collaboration points, communication points, team meetings. I don't want someone just to come in for the sake of coming in so that they've met their 2-day quota. We want them to come in for a reason. And so we're working on ways of doing that is kind of where we are with it. But I personally think that having some face-to-face interaction, whether it be retreats or is a key part of building culture. Sure. And in an organization with so many frontline people, we need to be there to support them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think J&J has a very similar, mindset around still needing that level of face-to-face collaboration. But what kind of coming at this from like a process and supply chain brain, I think one of the things we can do now to enable that flexibility in the future is take all these disparate channels that, we have today. And I don't think this is unique to J&J, but you go down one path for an FTE, you go down another very different path for staff augmentation or contingent. There's a freelancer path. There's a number of things in that void, and the requirements are different. The timeline is different. The way you approach, who you approach is different. And that complexity for that person trying to find and fill that role is, it puts a lot of risk on them to go down one path and then have to turn around and start over. And I don't think that enables any of us to have that flexibility or agility that we're going to need. So what I envision and think we need to be investing in is creating the infrastructure that makes that more interoperable and makes the user have access to a number of different things at one time, because you're going to need to pull a different lever on a different day. And so I think that's super critical to success moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because there's plenty of organizations that I'll meet as we go along this journey that it's so siloed, it becomes detrimental to that idea of flexibility. If you head down that full-time path, it's taking longer than you want. You want to start getting some work done. It is like you have to turn around, go all the way back to the beginning, and start down a new path. So being able to move back and forth is really valuable, but it takes collaboration across the functions. So with that, we're going to switch gears. We're going to ask some questions. So I feel like I've asked a bunch of really great questions already, but I'm sure you have some as well. I don't have a monopoly on great questions. We've got the basketball thing. If you want to do a Steph Curry impression, there's a basketball-looking microphone, and we'll get it to you to ask a question.
Hey, is this thing on? So thanks for that. The infrastructure question and kind of connecting back to this corner, everyone's got their corner office at their house. Question is something that I'd love to expand on a little bit. Maybe you all could talk about some specific things that you're doing to rebuild office environments, perhaps, to be more amenable to both hybrid work as well as kind of reestablishing some of these cultural elements. And any examples would be really helpful. We had talked about kind of Slack and Confluence and other sort of shared documents before. That's something my organization is struggling with a lot. And so would love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's great. Let's start that.
Sure. I mean, I can tell you a few things that we're doing. So we were in the process of moving out of offices prior to this. So the good thing is it actually saved me a whole bunch of change management, because everyone just lost their offices. So problem solved. But yeah, so I think a few things that have happened is we've reworked a lot of our rooms, so we have a lot more meeting space. So if you looked at a traditional office, we would have had rows of cubicles of people working. Now you see it's completely we spent a lot of money redoing it. We have lots of meeting room space. We have access to digital Zoom cameras in every meeting. Things that you would say were obvious, but weren't obvious, honestly, 24 months ago. So we've enabled technology in all of them. We've put in really good equipment. So we have big double monitors. I know for a tech company these are not big deals, but for us they were. So people, when they come in, they can work effectively, because a lot of people at home had big, huge monitors, right? And they kind of built this Cadillac situation at home, some folks. So we really tried to create highly collaborative environments so that when people come in, they have great experiences. And we've upped some of the stuff with, we have a coffee center. We've just done a lot of things to create points where people can collaborate and spend time together. Because ultimately our belief is people, I think as someone said at the beginning, they don't come to the office, they come to see other people. Mm-hmm. So we want to make that interaction as positive and reinforce that as much as possible.
Yeah, we've made similar investments in terms of kind of the in-office infrastructure, and I would definitely double click on the technology that's now available in all of our collaboration spaces is really a game changer. Even if we take a step away from whether or not people are returning to the workplace, a global company is constantly faced with that challenge of you might have 15 people in the room in the US, and then the 10 people dialing in from somewhere else who've always felt at a disadvantage in those conversations. And we've definitely seen a shift having to live through the pandemic and go into that totally virtual world where it was a level playing field, and we weren't willing to go back. That was not an option. So we've definitely improved the technology that's available so that it does feel, whether you're, in a room with people, or you're that person dialing in, you have the face-to-face, you can follow the conversation, you get the joke. And, I think some of that seems little, but it goes a really long way in keeping people engaged and tapping into that benefit of it's the people that make it worth going to work. And so we can cover that in a couple different ways.
Yeah, and it's shifting the mindset of what the office is for, right? Like David, you mentioned, and what you just described, Sarah, it's not just where we do work. It becomes a tool for how we get work done and how we collaborate. And if it's going to be a tool for that, it's got to be better than being at home. Or else people are going to be like, why am I here instead of at home where I had all the comforts that Hayden described earlier?
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? I see one over here. Boom. Good catch.
Thanks. Really appreciate the dialogue, and I'm wondering about the influence of an increased freelancer contingent in a large organization and the change in culture. So just thinking about the Culture Code by Daniel Coyle and the idea that emotional, relational safety and a certain sense of shared purpose is a driver for strength in culture. When you have freelancers who may or may not be a part of the organization for a while, and you have a large number of folks who are just going to be inherently more transient, do you have a challenge with how that impacts the culture of the organization? Can you just talk about how you've thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, the great question. We'll start with you, Zoe.
Yeah.
3/4, that's a big percentage of the population that's freelance.
Is.
How do we build a culture across those hybrid teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to sound somewhat rudimentary, but everybody's a person. And so we start at a very human level of connection with checking in with people. How are you? Genuinely, like not just, hi, Tony, how are you? And what are we doing about this project? But like, talk to me, tell me what's going on. Every one of our teams has ways to communicate. We have a lot of Slack usage. There's a lot of, check-ins, daily stand-ups, all of that. And we do get together. It's really important that it's not, again, I don't want us to be in this binary. It's either completely remote or completely together, because coming together to kick off a project, to work together, to do meetups where people are together for 2 weeks, on location, really combining thoughts and ideas and sharing makes a tremendous difference for us. I think that matters a lot. I do think, to kind of go back to something I said earlier, there's an inspiration level when you bring in people from different perspectives, different diverse, paths in their past that really help people spark different ideas. And that in and of itself, makes people more open to collaborate, more open to share. And I think that does build the psychological safety that we know is a cornerstone of a really successful and engaged community. I think all of those things make a tremendous difference when they're put together. And I think the other thing is, certainly in many parts of the tech world, it's no longer the case that a corporate team member is with you for 5 years, right? The average tenure is decreasing pretty significantly over the last few years. And so it may be that this comparison, again, is somewhat of a false dichotomy about like somebody who's a long time, tenured person here versus somebody who is, quote unquote, just a freelancer who's only going to be with you for a little while. The time in seat may end up being more similar than we've looked at before, depending on the role and how you use that going forward.
That's really good point. Go ahead.
Maybe I should change the emphasis on the question a bit. It's we're really focused on our organization purpose as we're thinking about culture. And if you have freelancers that are working with usually multiple organizations, how do you intertwine culture and purpose effectively for your specific firm?
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear obviously what you say, but just briefly, for us, those two things are inextricably linked. Upwork is based on the belief that we can connect and collaborate more successfully together. We're stronger together, and our purpose is really delivering that for both talent and companies. And so if you're a freelancer with us or a corporate team member with us, you believe that too, because that's your life. And so we give people the opportunity to live their values every single day in the work that we do. And we talk about that very openly. And you can feel the difference you're making on somebody's life because you're working with a hybrid team. You see it happen. It's just part of what happens with us every day. So I get that we have a pretty unique, privileged position on this one, but I do think being as transparent and as inclusive about your culture and what matters to you will get the right people working with you all the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, culture is very much about living your values, right? So the more that you extend that across the team and not just have one group of your team that lives its values and the others get to kind of passively move in and out of the teams without expressing the same behaviors, creates two different cultures. So I think the more that we include freelancers or independent contractors in that relationship, in that experience, cultural impact is positive. Well, great. I think we have time for one more question in the audience. I see one right over here. Good throw. Let's see if we get another one. Don't let it hit the floor. I think it blows up.
No pressure.
It wasn't as tough as I thought. But I think my question is for David and Sarah, and it's you both work for large organizations that are global. And so I'm curious in approaching the relationship with Upwork, whether the success has been mostly centric around one geography, and if it's been U.S. managers versus others. I also come from a large organization, so I'm curious if your success is driven by specific groups, like you said, the joint venture, or specific countries in your organization.
So I'll speak to, we have primarily focused on the U.S. We signed a global contract, which is great. Frankly, I've been focused mostly in the US, that's where I'm closest to. I do look after kind of our international marketing space, so I've started to some dialogues there. So my personal belief is it doesn't matter where the people are. I don't think it makes any difference. It's just a matter of kind of share of mind and me getting it in front of some of those groups.
Yeah, I'd say organically we absolutely saw our early growth in the US, and then that extended into Europe and other markets. But I think what's been more effective than thinking about a region-based strategy and rollout is more around the word of mouth that happens from the user, because our teams are inherently global and intertwined. So the marketing team is global, and word of mouth happens that this great project was executed faster and less expensively than ever before, and that can then spread more so than kind of thinking about it in a very deliberate way. And so allowing for some of those best practices and success stories to move within the organization has definitely proven to be more beneficial than sometimes that kind of more top-down, big communication and launch type of approach to things.
Well, thank you so much for those responses. Thank you for those great questions. Like I said, I don't have a monopoly on it. You guys asked really good questions I wouldn't have anticipated. So thank you very much for that. How about this panel? They did a great job. So I want to thank Zoe, David, and Sarah very much for joining us today. You did a great job and really appreciate your input.